Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Swede Rolls. I'm Chris.
I'm Toby.
I'm Max.
And joining us for the first time is...
Andrea.
Welcome, Andrea, to our show. Andrea is my lovely wife, and she has agreed to come here and represent kind of the MMORPG part of role-playing, which is a world that I'm slightly unfamiliar with.
And I have no idea about it, because every time I play an MMORPG, I lose my pants.
Well,
Wow.
you have to play from the comfort of your home, so...
Yes.
Yes, that's true. Do you lose your pants in real life, or...
Both.
Oh,
Oh dear.
that's a story I'm partially intrigued and partially frightened to
I
hear.
can probably... Oh, we have a podcast where I can talk about some role-playing in that.
We do?
Yes.
So your character in MMOs just don't wear pants?
No. We can take it for the other podcast.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yes.
Well, Andrea, this is your first time on the podcast, so as we usually do, you have to...
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm
I'm going to ask you some questions, and the first question I'm going to ask is, what is your worst role-playing experience?
in all 17 years. That's kind of hard.
Well, 17 years. Wow.
Yes, I've been role playing for 17 years. It's quite a while.
More than me and Toby.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Anyways, sorry.
Yes, my worst. Well, it's hard to say the worst. I think overall it's just when it ends. You know, either when you have a role play experience, when you're like have a D&D group or something, and the story just doesn't go on because of whatever reason,
Oof,
and stuff like that.
that's
Like
an interesting
I think that I would because in character there's like I don't think there's a really bad experiences, just experiences,
Okay.
unless there's someone really getting out there to grief you or whatever. But
Oh, yeah, griefers.
yes,
Yeah.
oh I've been lucky. I haven't had a lot of those, so.
You got to explain what that is in a bit. But what's your best role-playing experience?
My best happened, I think, within the 2 years now that I've been mostly playing in MMOs. I've been playing MMOs for, I think, 5 years now. But 2 were the best, and it was like this plot that I was kind of stuck on a character, and I came to the bosses of the guild. I'll call it guild, because if I said for a company, people outside Final Fantasy won't know. And I was like, I don't know what to do with my character. Let's start a plot. And I started a plot, and it was supposed to be something super simple with like 5 people or something, and 15 people or 20, I don't know how many showed up. So we were just supposed to get some supplies, really. But it turned out they were the most guarded supplies in the world, apparently. So that was fun, very fun.
Was this in Guild Wars or Final Fantasy?
Final Fantasy 14.
So, what do you think the bandits thought when they saw the supply run?
We kicked their butt. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Surprise army.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quite.
Wow.
Quite.
And that's very interesting. So you've done most of your role-playing online then?
Recently, yeah. I wouldn't say most, because if I put it on a scale, I think I've done quite a lot of tabletop as well. But yeah, I think it's mostly like that in MMOs, but
That
maybe
most
not before.
most people role-playing in MMOs
come
mostly
from some kind of other type of
okay,
roleplay
yeah.
before, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. We're going to have an episode actually talking about role-playing in MMO specifically, but today we're going to be talking about a topic that is a little bit all over the place. And the topic at hand is actually playing in Canon. And Canon is a term basically that means the acknowledged...
Accepted?
The accepted truth. Yeah, exactly. Except it comes from religion initially, I believe, and has to do with what's accepted faith and what isn't, I believe.
I think it's something like what is written into scripture.
Yes.
But I'm not 100% certain.
I believe like the Bible as it is canon. And then you have scriptures that are not part of the Bible. In whatever case it comes from, it's essentially about a preset world, a predetermined set of facts that you have to relate yourself to. So canon, for example, if you had a computer role-playing game like Skyrim, for example, the canon in there would be that you are the Dragonborn. So you're on your quest to fulfill that prophecy.
I would say spoilers.
Yeah, of course, because it's not obvious 1 hour into the game that, oh yeah, you are the chosen one. What a surprise.
Or from the commercials.
That's true.
That is very true.
Wouldn't it have been interesting if he was the bad guy, though, or they were the bad guy?
Oh.
The Dragonborn was the bad guy.
Like, dragons are good, and him killing them is bad.
Yeah.
Or the
That's
character
an idea
killing them.
for a sequel. Don't steal that from us, Bethesda.
We
Actually,
know how
please
you,
steal it.
we know how you love Bethesda.
Yeah, of course. That's an entirely different subject. But in canon, for example, fan fiction writers often relate to canon because they go like, okay, is this according to how the story goes, or am I going with my own version of how the story goes? And I think one of the most famous role-playing game canons would be Forgotten Realms, right? It's been around for
A
ever.
very long time.
Yeah.
Very long time.
Forgotten Realms is the canon realm of Dungeons and Dragons, or the kind of showcase world of Dungeons and Dragons. You have Elminster, the wizard. You have
Gods.
Yeah, the same Behemoth being the platinum dragon. I don't know why I went for Bahamut. Tiamat, yeah. You also have Drist, the Drow rogue, for example. It's been around for a very long time, and Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights are based on those games, and even 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is set in Forgotten Realms, unless you say otherwise.
I'd say Forgotten Realms is the largest Dungeons and Dragons setting, even though it isn't the only official one. But it is the archetypical one, I suppose.
Yeah, they have Ravenloft, which is more horror themed. They have
Ebron,
which is
sci-fi sort of.
I think so.
Magic science.
And they've actually released a setting for Magic the Gathering to Dungeons and Dragons, I heard.
I believe it's Zendikar.
Zendikar, yeah. They've actually released Zendikar as a Dungeons and Dragons setting.
Because Zendikar was actually based on Dungeons and Dragons style adventures.
Because it's Wizards of the Coast.
Yes.
Yeah.
biggest gaming company, or at least
Cheap move,
yeah.
But if we own both franchises.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, it is actually not a bad idea, mostly because it's like, hey, we have all this extra things we haven't published in this, so why not just stick it in there?
So you're essentially making Magic card players have another reason to go into Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons players another reason to go into Magic the Gathering. It's dollar signs.
Which both are very popular.
Yeah, they are. And they are, interestingly, you always kind of have to relate to Forgotten Realms when you're making your own campaign in Dungeons and Dragons. Like, you always have to sort of be like, okay, it's different from how this is, because Forgotten Realms is so typical Dungeons and Dragons, right?
It's sort of the measuring stick, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Where you just sort of...
How different are we from this?
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's interesting... Way back when I was playing my first MMORPGs, there wasn't that much. I mean, role-playing was kind of a thing that people did as an extra thing. There wasn't really specific areas. There were unofficial areas, designated role-playing areas, for example. But I think with actually not World of Warcraft, I think you played Lineage 2, right, Andrea?
Yes.
And that had a pretty strong role-playing community. I think you told me, or maybe not.
Not that strong.
Oh, okay. Well, I misremembered.
I can't speak for that game specifically because it's been. Here's the thing: it's different for European and US communities, and I've learned that it's much easier to find roleplay communities on US servers. And for the Lineage 2 part, it was mostly on European communities, and they have the added problem of language.
Yeah, you have Germans
but
and French and Spanish. I was gonna say Spanish, but
people still roleplayed, but it was more, in small groups, and it wasn't as organized. But in general, I feel like over time, since then, people have gotten a lot more organized and a lot more into the whole scene of
because World of Warcraft had dedicated role-playing servers, which I think was one of the first games to do that. I think
there are some role-playing games which had both very early, but World of Warcraft was one of the few who had dedicated RPG servers very early.
I mean, Ultima,
official RPGs.
And I mean, Ultima Online, and
Yes.
and what was the other one? Kind of really old. That's still around.
Oh, EverQuest?
EverQuest. I mean, they were kind of made for role playing, I think, sort of.
They feel like they're more role play going to the role play side than having an PvP. But Ultima Online is also a very hefty system to learn.
Yeah. But World of Warcraft is super simple, and I think it really broke a lot of new grounds for role playing. The fact that they had dedicated role playing servers, and yeah.
I just wanted to say that do you think that having dedicated role playing servers is better or worse?
That's an interesting question, and I think it's better.
Uh-huh.
I personally, but I don't role play in MMOs, so I have no idea. But I think just the fact that they exist, so people can get the idea that I can role play in this game. I don't know.
I think it depends a lot on the community as a whole, because if you've got a very large community, perhaps it makes sense to segment it a little bit. Whereas if you have a community of, say, a very small group of players, splitting that group might result in very empty feeling worlds. So World of Warcraft being such a huge community probably enabled them to do this comfortably, that they could populate an entire RP server with no sort of being scared that it would feel empty or abandoned.
Yeah, I think that World of Warcraft did it very well with having a dedicated RPG server, because that's a good stepping stone into the whole genre of role-playing in Warhammer. Warcraft.
Well, Warcraft.
Yes.
Warhammer did have dedicated role-playing servers, I believe. Warhammer Online.
Some maybe,
but that was not.
But it wasn't a great
hit.
game.
No, it wasn't.
It was fun for a while, but no.
But the general thing that's so interesting with World of Warcraft, and that later games like Guild Wars and Final Fantasy XIV have built on, is the fact that there's a very rich lore, a very accessible lore. And I believe that Final Fantasy XIV really took it very far, because they have released entire books of the lore, if I'm correct.
Yes, there's been a lore book released late last year. But a lot of the lore is actually, you have to kind of search for it in the game.
Oh.
I think that the current MMO that's done it the best is Guild Wars 2, or Guild Wars franchise in general. Lore-wise, mind you, I think that they have a wikia. You know, if you
an
need,
official wiki?
I don't think it's an official, but it's fan based.
Okay.
Don't quote me on it. I haven't checked ever.
Okay.
But if I ever needed anything from any point in time, because it's a game that's been running for a really long time, so they've built it up before Guild Wars 2 was even released, and so this whole gods and world, everything is very well saturated, and I think,
And I think that's super important that you have players who actually gather all this information, because every game has this master document with all the gods and the history and stuff like that. But so many developers don't actually release it. Well, okay, not every game, but
I mean, there's a lot of that in any game that has a rich lore surrounding it. Any Forgotten Realms game has a lot of books written.
Absolutely.
Any Warhammer game has a lot of books written about it.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say what game has the most, really.
It's hard, yeah. But you bring up Warhammer, for example. We play 40K as a role-playing game, and we always have to kind of relate to lore. And we've had people comment on, no, you got that wrong, or stuff like that. It's hard.
It is hard because it's a large thing.
Yeah.
It's a very large thing to actually try to remember it all.
Yeah.
But last time I played Warhammer before this was when we were role-playing with the figurines.
Mm-hmm. That must have been a really long time ago.
That is quite a long time ago.
You haven't played a computer game with Warhammer in it?
Maybe?
Total War, maybe?
Space Marine?
Yeah, which is very lore light.
It is very lore light.
And that's why you appreciate it more when you know the lore, because they're very subtle in how they deliver it.
Yes, it is very subtle. But still, going back to the Wikia on specifically Final Fantasy XIV, if anything, I would if it was fan-based, or if it is fan-based, I would probably like to read the lore more because they are more dedicated than the actual developers.
Yeah. That's you have these firebrand souls that are fire soul. I don't know how to translate that to Swedish, English. You have these dedicated people who spend a lot of time writing it down, and they write it down well, so it's easy to.
And then you wonder, why aren't you writing books for a living?
But like for Final Fantasy 14, for example, let's go back to that. The miqo'te race, the cat people, they have this whole naming system, for example.
Oh yes.
That why don't you tell us about how that works?
Well, I think every game kind of has a specific situation about, like, especially I'm talking about MMOs here.
Yeah.
It's been a very long time since I played World of Warcraft, so don't you're gonna have to cover that, I guess.
I played it a month.
I played it way too long.
But I can speak for Guild Wars 2, and I can speak for Final Fantasy 14, and I can say that for Guild Wars, there are some naming conventions, but you have the right of it. Like, I playing Final Fantasy 14, considering they don't have a wiki anywhere that I'm aware of. You come into, and I remember the first thing I had to buy before I started to roleplay was a name change, because I didn't check out the lore about the naming convention, and I don't think that's something people should be forced to do. No. It's just something I did, and they have this whole. Every race in Final Fantasy actually has has two subcategories, kind of. Yeah. And then each subcategory has a different naming conventions. But for the sake of argument, let's just put out the miqo'te. So they have two subcategories, and one is the moon, Keepers of the Moon, and the other is the Seekers of the Sun. And for example, the Keepers of the Moon are the ones that have the most complex naming system, in my opinion, because they have a whole lore based on their matriarchal, from what we can tell from the game and from what we can tell from the lore book. So whenever a girl is born, for example, they give her her name, and then the surname, and it's supposed to be some kind of a easily pronounceable name, kind of, nothing too complex. And then you have, but the boys, when the boys are born, when males are born, they don't actually get a name. Their name is their mother's name, apostrophe, and then number of which son they are.
A letter that represents the order in which they're born.
Specific name means they're the first son, the second son, third son, and so on, and then the family clan name, which is,
But it's interesting because if you look at the culture of like traditional Japanese names, for example, this kind of system of naming your children in the order they were born actually exists. So it's not taken from nothing.
I mean, miqo'te, or what are they called? This sounds a little bit Japanese.
Oh yeah, and it's a Japanese game, but they have they use suffixes and prefixes a lot. I believe prefixes with the names, like before
suffixes.
Suffixes, sorry.
The other cats use prefixes. Okay. They have
name of the clan, right?
They have a tribe, they're called, I think, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And they work a little bit differently depending on, they have the first letter of their name is which clan they belong to, and that clan tribe, which tribe they belong to, and which animal that tribe praises.
Wow.
For example, I don't know all of them. There's like one for each letter of the alphabet. So
what? And yes. the best part here, if we talk about the topic of playing in canon, there's no rule that says you have to name your character according to this. They have random name generators, correct?
Exactly.
And do they actually follow this convention? Yes. Okay.
I believe so.
Yeah. And that's actually very useful, because if you can't figure out a name, you get your name generated. But it's always about this relating to canon. And in MMORPGs, you don't have to. But for example, in your guild, it would be slightly frowned upon if you had a non-serious name.
Well,
if I was named Dingus McDingus, would I be allowed to be?
You would not get in. I'm sorry. No, but if you had a name that doesn't follow a naming convention, I'm sure there's a way you can work around it. Right. Like, we've had people that haven't had a canon name, but that have explained it through their backstory. For example, either it was like a miqo'te, for example, that was raised by humans, or they call them Hur in that game, but and has a more, it doesn't have the prefix, suffix, whatever, that kind of thing.
So they would be quite angry if I came and tell them, "Hi, my name is Bob."
Probably. But it's interesting how people want to apply role playing to things that were not probably originally intended for role playing. And we mentioned Skyrim briefly.
Yes.
And I think the only good time I've had with Skyrim was when I sat down and created this character with a set path in the story. I wanted to do this and this and this.
Was it when we were playing?
We haven't played Skyrim.
We have.
No, we tried. That didn't even work. No, this was when I actually have over 100 hours played in a game that I absolutely hate, which is
Child's Play.
Yeah, of course you played Dota, but essentially
I don't roleplay as a drunken pirate. Okay, I am a drunken pirate.
You live your character.
Where's your eye patch?
That sounds amazing.
Where's my peg leg?
But Skyrim, I've heard many people say that the game actually becomes really good when you set these limitations upon yourself, which I have to say is bad game design if the player actually has to take these steps. But if it makes the game more enjoyable, then sure. Like if you say, I don't want to be the leader of the Warriors Guild and the Wizards Guild and the leader of the Assassins and the leader of the Thieves. I just want to do this in the game.
Yes. Then you have a set path for yourself.
Yeah. So like, and I know Let's Players sometimes role play a game.
That is usually reserved for streaming purposes, though.
Oh yeah. Like
it's a lot easier than having episodes.
That's true. So you're like exploring the game as the character you're playing.
Exactly.
Yeah. But there's also this different ways, like there's different kinds of canon.
Yes.
I mentioned the Sailor Moon role-playing game. I feel like I'm talking a lot this episode, but what else is new?
Go right ahead.
The Sailor Moon role-playing game that I have is actually a very well-designed game. And you can tell that the people who made it did a lot of research into the actual series.
So they watched Magical Girls.
200 episodes of Sailor Moon, yeah.
Yep.
They actually have episode summaries too. But it's interesting because they give you these tools to understand how the world is created, even though, I mean, you could create your own magical girls, essentially, and magical boys in this setting. And it struck me as very interesting that people actually sat down and wrote down the canon for a 90s shoujo anime for you to play in. But, I mean, it was popular.
I'm reminded of a slight anecdote where they had to shut down, I think it was a Cardcaptor Sakura forum, since it just was full of middle-aged men.
Oh my god.
Including some who refused to not talk like a samurai.
What?
There's a story there.
That's all I heard about it.
But it's the same. The webcomic me and Andrea met through, Homestuck. I role-played on a forum. I think I mentioned this in a previous podcast you were in. And we role-played in a fan setting that sort of spun off of something that was canon. And we sort of established this fanon, which is the fan canon.
Yeah.
When you fill in the blanks and you do it as faithfully to the original canon as you can. And that's a really interesting, if you take a step back and actually look at this social phenomena of people sitting down and going, okay, how does this carapace character actually, how do their joints work? Because that's obviously not explored. They're covered by a thick black carapace. It's like, how does that work? Do they wear clothes? Like, it's kind of exploring social issues out of something that is extremely undetailed in the original work.
And then the creator comes in and says, yeah, that's a great idea.
That actually happened. And he actually was in touch with some of the people who ran this, and he re-implemented some of these stuff in the comic, not a lot of it.
There's a hilarious story about that. The creators of Lost, the television series, actually read the fan boards and chose the direction they were going in based on fan theories.
Interesting.
Because they took inspiration from it, because there was a lot of it.
Yes,
there was a lot of
it
speculation and a lot of ideas. So why not use that as a trove to write from? Maybe not the next episode, but in the long term,
we have a role-playing game to play. Where the canon is gonna be lost.
What?
We're gonna be on an island, mate.
No. No, I refuse. I refuse to play that.
There's also the opposite, which in, I think, TV tropes named it jossing.
Or just Sweden.
Yes.
Ugh.
Because the first thing that usually happens in any series he's involved in is he crushes the fan theories in the first episode of the season.
Typical Sweden.
Like he kills off the character everyone assumed would be important or something like that. And I'm not sure if that's been established as being he read the forums and went, nope, or if that's just him being unpredictable.
But I believe there's a lot to gain from playing in a pre-established setting. I think there's value in both pre-established settings and your own settings, your own homebrew.
Yeah.
But I think these kind of constraints makes you develop lateral thinking, like we were talking about before. How can I work within these constraints?
Yes.
Like Andreas, your character Rayleigh, for example, from Final Fantasy XIV, you have this very developed story based on the premises set by the game, right?
Yes, I think that having limitations doesn't necessarily limit creativity, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's like you have specific pointers which to go by, and then you can just weave around it, and that's how it is for tabletop settings as well. You always have some kind of limitations even there.
Yeah, like your drow, you made a drow before, right?
Oh, yes.
And he ran away from home.
Yes.
Why did he run away from home?
Oh, I'm drawing a blank.
Because his mother and sister,
yeah,
right?
he wanted to. He was supposed, something like that. He didn't get along with.
No, because
the
male drow are kind of second-class citizens,
Yes.
I believe.
It was a long time ago.
And it doesn't have to be Drizzt, I'm the only good drow in the world. You can still work within like a moral gray aspect of it.
It's kind of like taking inspiration from the limitations instead
absolutely.
of thinking of them as like something that constricts you also.
I think it's a good idea to see it, like you said. They're maybe a bit more like stepping stones or a building block that you can go from, rather than seeing them as something standing in your way. That you should always look at it like, oh, this is what I have to stand on. Where can I go from here? Rather than this is in the way.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people say that once you put up a frame, it's easier to paint inside it. And other people say that once you put up a frame, you're limiting your view of the world. But if you really want to play the 4-sword samurai warrior in every single game you're in, then maybe you should reevaluate, like, maybe you should try something else. I'm just saying.
Right.
Then you've limited yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but first of all, what I think is very important for newer players, at least, who hasn't had this idea of developing an own canon or role-playing world or anything like that, having a canvas, which, for example, Forgotten Realms, is a very good, like, starting point to have this canvas and then extend it with your own things or even create your own world, which can be a bigger canvas.
And there's nothing wrong with playing a tried and tested stereotype in huge quotation marks.
Tried and tested millions of times.
Because they work, right? So
it works. There's nothing wrong with the lore and everything. It's just their system hasn't been great.
No, that's true. 5th edition is better than 4th, though.
Well, building off canon and things, it's also very useful for a game master of some kind to have maybe this is your first time being a game master, being able to go back and lean at all this structure that's already built into the world means you can focus on the smaller things. You can focus on making it work for your players rather than having to construct the city you're in because, there was a city map that was canon for this city. Great.
That is actually a very good point for GMs, for example. It's a lot easier to start with one of these lore systems, in big lore systems in the beginning, and then after that, going to make your own and get inspiration from multiple systems or multiple lores, or even combine some of them. We have an example of that, also. Varangia.
Oh yeah, Martin's campaign.
Yes.
Started out as a kind of a rip-off, to be honest, and then just organically grew out of that into its own thing.
But now it's huge.
Yeah,
it's
it is
an enormous world.
Yeah, you can still see the framework from what it was before, but it's like a fungal growth that's just grown out of it, and you can barely see what it once was. And I'm making my own setting for our Dungeons and Dragons podcast. That's a big surprise for playing Dungeons and Dragons as well. And
we will have our first recording session before. No, wait. So this is right before we're gonna
exactly.
Record, yeah.
And one thing that I struggle with was, where do I start the world building? Because I wanted to make my own setting, and I just kind of started and stopped, and then I saw one piece of advice online. It was that start with the first town and the first adventure. And then during session 0, like if you want to be a wizard, okay, you're from that place. You just make up a name, and then later when you go there, you can start working on it. So I think that if you're going to establish a canon, you have to sort of do it in steps, iterations, I believe.
I think that depends on you as a person as well. That some people will start with world building. They'll build the world up from scratch, creating continents, creating politics, creating countries, or whatever is most important for that world, creating, I don't know, dragons and areas to stay away from. Whereas other people would go more, as you say, start where the characters start, and then the world will grow from there.
An interesting thing with that is I did create my own world before. I made my own setting, and you briefly played in it, I think, Toby, for 4th edition.
Maybe.
The problem you can encounter when you put a lot of time and effort into your own setting is that the players just don't really care about that setting. I'm not saying this made it sound like you didn't care about it. All I'm saying is you can invest hours and hours and hours into developing this complex international relationship between the countries, and the players are going to be like, I want to be friends with this ogre. You'd be like, he's just a monster. I want to be friends with this ogre. So, okay, like there's going to be unexpected turns that just is way more important to the players than it is for the GM.
Yes, true. I mean, that's again part of what is canon and what is not. Like, if ogres are canon, they're not sentient. They're sentient they would be, but they're animalistic.
Yeah.
They don't have higher intelligence. They're just gonna club things and eat, and that's all they do. Then trying to say I'll be friends with an ogre won't
I'll tame him.
work. You'd have to say I'll tame him, or it or her.
No, but as an
whatever.
example of how player
agency.
Sorry.
Agency.
Yeah, player not agency. Player prioritization. How players prioritize very differently from a GM.
Yeah, I mean, I always see the world as being the backdrop. It's never like if the players want to explore it, they'll approach it, and if you have something ready for that, okay. Yeah. But you should never expect the players to go and look at all the details you've painted. They might just be nice backdrop.
I think if you were to ask on Reddit, for example, like how many of you have created a complex world that you never found players for example, there would be quite a lot of people would say, yeah, I spent a lot of time working on this world, and then it just...
Oh, you can recycle.
That's true.
So I feel it's never to waste. That's just my feeling.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Another bad side of strict canon is that you can have arguments spring up between players and game masters if there's an established canon on how things work. And then the GM goes against that for some reason, and we're lucky. We don't really have players like that.
No.
But rule lawyers, but for canon. Like, no, they would never do that.
For me, I just roll with it. If it's more fitting for the setting, it's probably better than being anal about rules and lore.
Anal is a good word. That was what I was looking for. Yeah.
In MMO settings, they would be the lore police or something like that.
Yeah, lore police. That is a good word.
I would probably be thrown out.
No.
You would be Bob. So
yes.
No.
The cat Bob.
The thing is, usually it's like I think some people are obviously you have all kinds, because so many people are always found in the community. There's a lot more people. If you think about it, in an MMO, there's a lot more people interacting than there would be in a D&D campaign tabletop. So there's always like a lot of different characters.
There's a huge range of skill as well.
Exactly. Right? A roleplay skill, game skill even, it comes into it, and so on. There's a lot of factors. But there's always those people who are going to be, oh no, it's not like that in the lore, you can't do that. And when you have an MMO setting and there's so many people, you kind of need to have a backdrop to go back to. But at the same time, I don't think being super strict about it is like, here's how we put it usually in MMOs. It's okay to bend lore, but not break it.
Like rules.
Kind of like...
like the law.
Well, that makes sense. To me, at least. That sort of... You can have your own interpretation of what's canon, but don't go exactly opposite to it. Don't do something that's strictly against it.
Yeah, because lore is more like guidelines for players and GMs.
And that is why you always have a session 0, where you go through that shit before you start.
Yes, exactly.
And with that little beautiful nod on the top, we're going to unfortunately have to end this episode because it's been way over 30 minutes.
Not that bad this time.
No, not really, no.
But yeah.
So thank you both for coming.
Thank you for having.
We'll see you in more episodes because we're not done yet.
No. There'll be a few more.
There's always more.
Yes. But until next week, keep rolling.
Keep rolling.
Keep rolling.
Keep rolling.
Thank you for listening to Swede Rolls. Your support means the world to us. The music you heard playing at the start and the end of this episode is Fireside Tales by Darren Curtis. The intent of this podcast is to discuss themes and issues in all manner of gaming, but primarily focused on the RPG genre. If you have any comments or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Pay us a visit at swederolls.com, where you can also learn about the people doing this podcast and more. For our Let's Play channel, check us out at youtube.com/Swede_fighters. And until next time, keep rolling.